We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey.
Hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your co-host, Austra Putnina, and today we're shifting gears a bit and I'll be interviewing you. Partly because it's your 100th episode, which we will touch on in a bit. And we discussed that it would be valuable for us to talk a bit more about you, get people some insights in your story a bit more. Which anybody listening, you can always go back to first episode where Lisa shared more of her story with her dear friend Liz. And before we get into your story, how do you feel about having 100 episodes?
It's so, on one hand, it feels like it's 100 episodes, and on another, it doesn't. It has flown by, but it has been absolutely amazing and remarkable. I have met so many cool people who are like-minded, who just really want to help, people who have had their own suffering, deep suffering, and turned it around, and not only are healing themselves, but helping others, which I just find amazing. The knowledge I've gained about trauma has been sometimes overwhelming. I'll be honest. It's sometimes overwhelming, but it's also been enlightening because, they talk about knowledge is power. And in all my research, this particular topic came up a lot, and that is, learning and understanding about your trauma is very important to your healing journey. And I know that to be true in my life, because as I'm learning about trauma and the effects of trauma and the behavior that comes out of trauma, explains so much about my life, and has allowed me to be able to separate who I am finally from the trauma and the behaviors of the trauma, so that I can, like, for example, when I get triggered, I'm able to take a pause and I'm able to respond appropriately rather than just react. So it's really been a journey. I've learned a ton, met a lot of people. It's been great. I'm looking forward to the next 100.
Ooh, yeah.
It's only going to get better. That's what my husband says. It only gets better.
I agree. Literally every episode. And question I have for you is, what are some of the things that you have noticed have changed or shifted in you compared to you, let's say, right before episode 1 and now 100 episodes later?
Well, in talking to so many people, right, I have been able to really connect with them and resonate so much with their stories, which just, I don't know what the word is. It just confirms in me more and more that the effects of trauma and being able to manage it. But, when you're hearing other people's stories and you're hearing that they have the same thoughts and beliefs and behaviors that you had, it really helps with the self-awareness and makes you realize, okay, that's within me too. But it's also encouraging because they talk about their healing, and it's encouraging.
And then I also had a question as you were speaking about, you said that you learned and understood your trauma better. Maybe as you slightly get into your story, what are some of the things that you have noticed as you have been doing the podcast, that you have learned about your trauma and your story, or some of the dots that you have connected?
I think the biggest is, one of the biggest is really understanding my triggers. What triggers me, when I'm triggered, and how to manage the trigger. And it's been really empowering. So a lot of, I guess what I've learned the most is my behavior and being able to separate me from that behavior, which allows me to then respond better.
And with that separation, because I feel like it's something that sounds simple,
I know.
and in some ways it is.
I mean,
Yeah.
once you get there, it's simple. Once you get there, it is simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what has helped you to get there? And maybe you can talk a bit more from perspective of where you were, or what was your like usual response to triggers compared to where you are now and how you deal with triggers now.
Before, I didn't even know that they were triggers. I didn't even know what triggers were. I didn't even, I heard the word triggers, but I didn't realize I was being triggered. And so if I didn't realize I was being triggered, I certainly didn't know what was triggering me. And now I am so aware of when I'm triggered. And so one of the things that I've learned that came to me recently is self-awareness is a superpower, because the self-awareness will help you become aware of when you're being triggered so that you can then manage it, rather than what I was doing before is I would just be triggered and I would just spout off. I would just
Yeah.
react.
Mm.
And the problem with that is in the middle of it, you feel completely out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it's over with, the guilt, the shame is overwhelming, and having to go back and clean up the mess. And the problem is people are forgiving, but they don't forget, and you're not trustworthy.
That was my next question. Because triggers is a big topic and it can affect literally all areas of life especially when you're not aware, you don't even know that you're being triggered. You
Right.
don't even know.
It's, yeah.
So that was the question that I had. Kind of, did you have that thought of, let's say you're now triggered, you react, and you are not aware that you're being triggered, you don't know any kind of behind the scenes about it. Did you have this thought of like something's wrong with me or something like that, and how do you deal with that at that time?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I definitely thought, because when you're in the middle of the trigger, how it felt for me before was it would consume me. It would take over. That's what it felt. It would take over. And then I'm also, as I'm being triggered and reacting, I'm watching the people that I'm reacting to, and I'm watching their reaction to me, and it's horrifying to me. And yet I can't stop this thing. And then when it's done, when I'm done spewing or whatever is happening, I didn't always spew, but reacting, let's say that, there's a sense of relief, because I don't know, it's kind of weird, but there's this moment or second of relief. And then that's when the guilt and the shame are overwhelming.
So what did you say to that Lisa or person listening who might be in that place right now, going through that or having those loops of that like pattern repeating?
Cycle, yeah.
Yeah.
It's becoming aware. You've got to work on self-awareness, and you've got to, because that is the only thing that's really going to stop it. You've got to have the self-awareness, and that means you're going to have to slow down and pay attention to, because for me, I'll tell you how it feels real quick, and maybe this will help the listeners identify it, because I didn't identify it before. When I think back on that, Lisa, like somebody could have explained it and then maybe I would have got it. But it just feels like you go from being calm to immediately upset. It's usually anger or frustration, and the thoughts go racing through your mind, and you're trying to understand it. You're feeling overwhelmed, anxiety rises up, and all you want to do is lash out. There's no calm, rational response. So that's how it feels. And so, journaling is a big deal, but the self-awareness, if you can just pay attention to how you're reacting to things. and it's really good idea to journal, because you're going to react to things and it's going to be fine and normal and okay. But then there's going to be those other ones that's going to be over the top. And as you become more and more aware of those, is when you're going to be able to feel empowered, and you're going to be able to catch them beforehand, so that you can have that pause between when you're being triggered and when you respond.
Yeah, I think that I have a good example of something that my friend said, that she had this. I think the situation was that one of her daughters, they had this like bubble thing, and it spilled over or something, and she was in bad mood, and she literally felt furious that
Yeah.
like emotions took over, and she thought she was behaving inappropriately towards her daughter, kind of telling her something or like whatever. And then she listened, or like she had a camera or something, and then she watched it back, and she was like, I actually did it. I was doing so well. You literally couldn't even see that I was furious. I was consumed by anger, or I was just like so annoyed in that moment. And I feel that's something that awareness is giving. It's giving you that chance to see yourself from the side, both good and the bad. But it's something that a lot of times we don't stop to, even as you were speaking about the self-awareness and journaling. My first thought with self-awareness also is to be curious and study yourself,
Yeah.
kind of as if you're trying to get to know a person that you don't know, because the
Right.
moment we assume that we know ourselves, that's when we kind of stop our growth. And also a question here would be like, did you get to that? Because there's another follow-up question that I'm really curious about. How, like, did you, I forgot the question.
Give her a minute.
Oh my
Welcome
gosh.
to my world.
Oh, I know what's the next question. But what's the first
Well, you
one?
were talking about how your friend was able to hide her emotions from her daughter, and being able to manage it so that, right? That's what you were, I don't know if that'll trigger anything.
Oh, yeah. Question is about like, did you have this assumption about like, this is just the way I am, I can't change it, and it will forever be like this?
That's a good question. It didn't. No, that didn't cross my mind. I just would look at them and think, why are they looking at me like that? Like, but I didn't think that, no. But I knew something was off, because, you do it enough times, and you're seeing this on everybody's faces, and you're the common denominator. So you start to realize, okay, it's something here that's not.
Okay, so what made you realize that? Because that's big. Sometimes you don't even get to that conclusion because everybody else is at fault.
Oh, no, no, that was not, no. I got tired of hurting people. I,
Mm.
you know, I, and I got tired of getting that reaction from people. And I just needed I just reacted. I just would react, and I wasn't thinking before I was reacting. And what I needed to do was start thinking before I started reacting. That's really what I need to do. And with just reacting is when you do damage. And I'm not talking about major damage. I was not this awful,
Yeah.
horrible person, but it wasn't okay. And it was survival mode. That's why I did it. I mean, I'm not going to be judgmental against myself. It was survival mode, and that's how I lived. And when you're in survival mode, you're getting from 1 minute to the next. You don't have the opportunity all the time to think ahead.
And follow-up question that I had was because I feel that, and this is my assumption, that if you are in survival mode, you're not really like super open-minded about stuff. And
Nope.
my question was like, what makes you so open-minded?
I think it started, back when I was like 19, when I knew there was something wrong within me. I didn't know what it was. And I think that I was in survival mode, but I was always looking to improve myself. There just wasn't a lot out there like there is now.
Mhm.
There wasn't the workshops, there wasn't the trauma therapy. There certainly wasn't that. There was a lot of traditional therapy, but trauma therapy wasn't around really. And so, yeah,
So take us back to 19 years old Lisa.
yeah.
When you realized that something is wrong, what was it that led you to that thought? What were some of the experiences, some of the situations that you have gone through by that like 19 years old Lisa?
Yeah, I was trying to think about that before. Like, what was it? And I think I was feeling pain, but I think maybe I guess I disassociated. I don't know. I know I didn't like the way I felt inside. I know that to be true, and that's as far as I can go with it. I don't think I realized at the time, which I realize now, is it was pain. It was a lot of pain.
How
Um,
would you describe that pain, like that feeling that you had? If you now would like get back into 19-year-old Lisa's
oh, I
body,
didn't
what
like
was it that you were
myself.
feeling?
I didn't like myself, and I didn't like my behavior, and I felt like the more I tried, the more I messed up. And I didn't have a lot of guidance because that's just how my life was. And losing my mom at 16, I didn't have a lot of guidance. So, yeah, I just felt like I was just this hot mess and I didn't know anything and I was just trying to figure life out.
And with that, like you mentioned that you lost your mom at 16. What were some other events that you gone through? Because there's quite a few
Yeah,
experiences that you have had.
I know, I know. Well, and my teenage years were really the roughest. So my younger years, there was abuse as far back as I can remember, but the abuse escalated when I put weight on, which was about 11 years old. And it was because I had began emotionally eating. I didn't realize that's what it was at the time. I had, honest to God, had no idea why I was putting weight on. Plus, your hormones are changing at 11, 12 years old. And so that'll do that. That'll cause your weight to kind of pump up a little bit. But that was the thing that triggered my mom to really get vicious. And my mom was all about her looks, and she was thin and she lived on coffee and cigarettes. And so when I started putting weight on is when she started getting abusive with me and calling me out on my weight. I didn't know how I was putting weight on, and so I certainly didn't know how to take the weight off. So I would get criticized but not taught.
Guided, yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, she got to the point where she said, if you don't take this weight off, I'm not buying you any school clothes and it was going to be my freshman year, in high school. I'm not going to buy you any clothes. And she honestly God, stuck to her guns. And I got down to like one pair of shorts and one shirt. My dad got mad and took me out shopping. So my teenage years were rough, and it was that on and off. And then when I started high school, just after I started high school, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And, she didn't talk to me about it. It was the neighbor that came and picked me up at school to tell me about it. And she went through a lot of chemo. She took a year of chemo. It was really rough. And she seemed to be in remission for like literally just months. So when I was about 15 and a half or so, it came back, but they didn't tell me. My parents didn't tell me. And it got to the point where all of a sudden she's not going to work anymore. She's home a lot. And then I'm now helping take care of her, and including giving her shots of morphine, going to the grocery store. But in the whole time I'm thinking she's just going to get better. And I was getting upset because nobody was talking to me about it until one day I cornered my dad, and he wasn't even honest with me. He said, I don't know if she's going to get better or not, but he knew it was terminal at that point. So everybody lied to me about it, or by omission, if otherwise. And I find out that she's actually dying when she gets rushed to the hospital. And I go up to the hospital, and I'm standing outside the hospital room and the doctor is in there and walks out and says, not sure she'll make it through the night, maybe 3 days, and walks off. And that is how I found out my mom was dying of cancer. So that whole event was traumatic, of course.
So what happened in that moment when you heard that?
I wanted to hit the doctor. Honest to God, I just thought, I did not see it coming at all. Did not see it coming at all. And, you know, family and friends were around. My dad was down getting her registered, so he wasn't there when this announcement was made. And so rather than walking up and hitting him, I turned around and walked away. And I just kept thinking, who does this happen to? Like, what just happened? My entire world just changed. Like, you're telling me my mom is dying? Last I knew, she was fine. She was getting better. As a matter of fact, she was walking around the house, which I didn't realize that that's oftentimes a sign right before they die, is they seem to be getting better. And that's exactly what she did. So you could imagine the shock here. She's now walking around. She doesn't need as many shots of morphine, to all of a sudden she's in the hospital and she's got 3 days maybe. So yeah, it was a lot.
How did you process that?
You know, I didn't. You know, I don't think I did, because I know at first, like, I didn't want to be out of her room, right? But as it got closer to her dying, I didn't want to be in the room. And I can remember after she passed, sitting at my friend's house thinking, what 16-year-old loses their mother? I didn't know anybody. So in 3 days, I find out my mom's going to die, and she dies. I didn't have time to even process it. It was just, for a long time, I just thought, whose mom dies at 16? And I stuck on that for a little bit, not very long. And then the thought I got was, okay, I guess I go back to school.
Okay, so here question, keeping audience in mind in case if there's somebody who has gone through that or maybe is going through that. What did you say to that 16-year-old Lisa?
What would I say now? What would I say now? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you weren't told the truth. I'm sorry that you're going through this right now. I don't know, I'd have to think about what else I would say to her, but actually I'm writing my letter to her and I haven't even gotten to this part yet.
Oh.
Yeah. So, you know,
I feel like I have another question with this. What do you feel she needed to hear?
Oh my gosh. She needed to be supported. She needed to be told she's sorry. She needed to have people surround her and just be there for her. I felt so alone. I felt so incredibly alone. And I felt alone in a crowd. At her funeral,
Yeah, it's like life goes on.
Yeah, exactly. At her funeral, it was a pretty big funeral, and I felt completely alone. It was
Even among your family?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what was it among, like, you were still among family, but what was it that made you still feel alone?
It didn't feel like anybody was they weren't asking me how I was doing. They weren't reaching out to me. The only thing I can remember, so she died in October of my junior year. And so the only time I remember anybody being excited or doing anything with me was for my prom in my senior year. And some of my mom's friends came over and put makeup on and helped me, and that was it. But my school counselors didn't reach out to me. And I don't expect anything from my friends. My friends were my age, and and they were there for me as much as they could be. I mean, it was something big. They couldn't manage that. But the adults in my life failed me. Family disappeared. Her friends disappeared. My dad completely shut down. My brother was around. That was fine, though. Probably actually a blessing. So I was really, really alone.
And how did you deal with that loneliness?
I was desperate for love. And I mean desperate. Because remember, I already had that belief that nobody liked me, nobody loved me. So that was already in the back of my mind. And then I lost my mom. And all these people aren't coming around. So I was desperate and I had to have a boyfriend. Because then that would show that I have value. If a boy comes along and likes me, well, then I've now got some value. And so I desperately looked for a boyfriend. I got one. I got one. Not good for me, but I got one. My choice in men were not good.
Okay, so with this, like, what are some of the things that affected your choice in men based on like your background and the trauma that you have gone through?
Well, and I don't think I've ever shared this on my podcast, and I've certainly never shared it with my ex. But I really, when my first husband and we were friends before we got together, but when he did begin to like me, it was amazing. I just jumped in with everything. I literally, this is terrible, but I literally believe this is the only man on the face of the earth that's going to love me. That is absolutely 100% what I believed. I believed he really loved me, and this was the only guy that I was going to ever be with, and he was the only man that would ever love me. So, I ignored some very red flags while we were dating, and we lived together before we got married. There were a lot of red flags there, and I ignored them because, hey, he was the only guy that was going to ever love me, so had to hang on to him.
So this is really, really, really powerful example of how the beliefs that you have got from your like traumatic experiences, how you carried them to other life areas, really important areas, and that affects your like decisions and even like staying in relationship probably, if not definitely, longer than you should have.
Yeah. And then there's a Christian belief that kept me in the marriage. And I really did marry him with the intent of being with him the rest of my life. Absolutely.
So I'm thinking like what helps to, let's say if there's somebody in that situation where there are red flags, and but at the same time it's like this belief of there's only one person that's gonna love me, it's stronger than the red flags maybe.
Oh yeah. Oh
how
yeah.
to how to know like what to listen to, or which voice is the right one, or like now you looking back to your situation, what would help you with where you are right now to navigate it like better, or make maybe like better decisions, or what was affecting your decisions like back then, because those are big decisions.
The yeah. And the biggest decision was and I just lost it. It was right there. Give me a second. So the question, repeat the question again.
So like what was it that was kind of affecting with you where you are right now, looking back at that situation, how would you navigate making those decisions, or what are some things that would affect those decisions with where you were?
You need to face reality first and foremost. And that's one thing I wasn't doing. I was seeing it, but I was pushing it aside, and I was dismissing that because I so badly did not want to be alone again. I so badly didn't want to be single. I didn't want to be alone and unloved. So I dismissed a lot of that and just set it aside. And so it's tough when you do finally face reality and you really look at it, and you look at the relationship, and you see whether that works for you or not. And if there's red flags, it's not the relationship that you should be in. But you've got a lot of things like trauma bonds and that kind of thing that, when it comes to trauma, that causes us to stay with someone that, obviously mistreats us.
Okay, so I'll challenge you here because it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
And with this, what would you Because I feel like a lot of times we kind of already know,
Yes.
but that fear or that belief of nobody loves me or that fear of being alone, which can be a terrible fear, it often feels like it's stronger or it can overtake us or our decisions.
Oh yeah.
So, what did you say to either yourself in the past going through something similar or to somebody who is going through something where that fear is seemingly bigger than some red flags, either in the person or some kind of life situation that they're in? What did you say to them?
Um, well, let me back up and say something that was coming to me. I think that might help, and then I can get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the one thing that I finally got tired of is reliving cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle after pattern with him. I got tired of it. And I remember thinking when I started looking at the real reality of everything, what is it going to take for me to trust him again? And that was going to be, I didn't think he could come through. And so that was the final decision for me.
How did you get to that question?
How do you get to that question? Well, probably for a year to 2 years before we actually separated, I was getting really tired again of the patterns. That's when I was, so I stuck it out for another 2 years. And, things got so bad. And the thing is, he gave me time alone. And I learned that I could live without him. And I learned that I could live without those patterns and I could live without the drama and I could live without that. And so that was kind of the final straw for me. I wanted to keep trying to seek out peace.
So, here, do you have any suggestions on how to learn to live with yourself, especially with loneliness being one of the biggest fears?
Yeah, it took me a while to get that down because it was lonely. It got, and it actually triggered the abandonment stuff in me. I mean, there was a lot of triggers going on, and it's not like, oh, I got the divorce and I made great decisions, because I didn't. Turned around and jumped right into another relationship, because again, I was looking for that man that's gonna love me. So what was the question again? I know I'm going on a tangent. Sorry.
We were talking about. So what helps with that, like getting comfortable with that loneliness, or not
Okay.
loneliness, but like just
Being
being with
alone.
yourself?
Being alone.
Yeah, being alone.
Yeah. So at that time, I was alone again. And although it was triggering me, it was also giving me time to start looking at myself and start working on myself. And it was painful. And
I was about to say, sounds painful.
it was very painful. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. A lot of tears, some screaming, a few tantrums. Yeah. There was a lot of that. But it gave me time to stop focusing on him and begin focusing on me. And let me say this too about the marriage. He's not the bad guy in this thing. I'm not the bad person. We loved each other. It was not a good relationship for either one of us. So I don't want people thinking that I'm sitting here bashing my ex-husband, because
Yeah,
I'm
being
not.
innocent.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no. I had just as much part in this as he did. So yeah. But
especially with you having like a lot of trauma in your background as well.
yeah, and a lot of stuff that he did triggered me. And he wasn't trying to trigger me. It was
Yeah.
just, that's the dynamic that was there. So, I mean, I kind of married my father. I really did. Yeah, I do recognize that. So, I started, spending that time doing self-improvement and looking within myself and getting into some more therapy and learning more about me. And I don't know at what point it switched, but I'm no longer lonely. And I know we've talked about this before. I actually enjoy my alone time. I don't want to be alone all the time, but I embrace my alone time. and I'm no longer lonely. But it was a process, and a lot of it was building a relationship with myself, because I was abusing myself as well. I was very abusive to myself. Everybody abused Lisa, right? It's the way it felt.
Before we get into abusing, because I feel that's a important topic,
Mm-hmm.
can you talk a bit more on like the tantrums and emotions? Because I feel it's something that a lot of times when it comes to healing journeys, it's like, oh, I did the work on myself, and here I am on the other end. But a lot of times we want to skip through the details of that messiness and the
Yeah.
emotions and the tantrums and all the crying, shouting, everything that comes out or comes in package with that whole healing journey. Can you talk a bit more on that, and maybe in some ways maybe even like give some encouraging words to people who might be going through that right now? Because I feel like some people might feel like something is wrong with them, or they're not doing it right, or it's not this like super like rainbows and sunflower flowers kind of journey that they're going through, that everything is super enlightenment. So maybe talk a bit more on that.
Well, first I'll say that healing is like, I describe it as like spring cleaning. It's going to get real messy before it gets better. And that's true. And the healing journey can be very painful at times. I think one of the things that I know I struggled with a lot, and I hear a lot of trauma people say, is struggling with control. And it makes sense, because when we're young and we're being abused, it's out of our control, and we have no control over that whatsoever. So it's just feeling of, okay, well, as I'm an adult, I'm going to control everything. And I definitely took on that role. And I can remember the very moment when I realized that I had no control over anything other than myself. And I was literally screaming. I was so angry. And it was like the final frustration, because I had been trying to control stuff for so long. And it, like, the more I tried to control it, the more out of control it went. And I wasn't getting that. And it was the final straw. And I just remember literally standing in my living room and screaming. I was so angry and frustrated and just done. And when I got done screaming, actually, there was this sense of relief. And then I realized, oh, I don't have to control everything. And then I realized what a relief that was, and how exhausting it was for me all my life trying to control everything. And I did it to try to protect me. I didn't realize it, but it makes sense, right? But then once I got through my tantrum and I realized that I didn't have to control everything, that wasn't my responsibility, that all I had to focus on was controlling this. That was huge for me. That still affects me when I think about that moment. It's just like, I just take a deep breath. It's just, whew. That was
And those
really,
moments are needed, and they will happen, because your example is really good, because as painful as that experience was, it was a big relief at the same
mm-hmm,
time. So you
mm-hmm,
go through that pain, but then you realize that you don't have to be in control of everything. So that is that moment of relief. And it's kind of what you said about spring cleaning. You go through that, and that's just one moment. There's
mm-hmm.
plenty of moments in the bigger picture of healing, but you go through that negative until you get to that, okay.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
actually isn't as bad as I would think. But within this moment, what shifted in your world, especially with the importance of control? And speaking on like trauma affecting different stages of life, how did that realization affect your future life?
It was a shift of, I just, it was like, I went from being overwhelmed because I'm trying to control everything, to being able to be focused. And I was able to go, okay, I don't have to spend all my energy and time on all that other stuff. I can now focus on me. And that sounds selfish, but it's not. It's really important. And that is why my healing escalated, because it was at that moment. Because I was instead of spending the time working on myself, I was working on you. I was working on you. I was working on you. It was everybody else. And so it freed me from that and allowed me to work on myself. And so, and how that has affected me in the future and in my going forward is I pick my battles. I know what my battles are and what they aren't. And it's so clear to me now, where before, okay, I would cross boundaries. I would offend people. I wouldn't mean to, and I wasn't, but I would tell everybody how they need to live their life. And now it's like, no, I pick my battles.
What were some of the things that you were trying to control?
Well, the biggest thing is I was trying to control and make everybody like me.
So other people's perception of you.
Correct. And then I was trying to change my husband too. So I spent a lot of time doing that too. Right. So that was a big project right there. Project I was never supposed to be on ever. But my focus always was, I gotta make sure that you like me. So there's manipulation in there, and there's not me not being authentic. It's I'm going to be the person I think that you want me to be so that you'll like me.
So you were pretty much like different person for every person.
I joke that I was a chameleon. And it wasn't that I was trying to be deceitful. That it's not it. And I wasn't doing that. It was just...
That's the only way you knew how to get love or to be
correct.
Liked. Yeah.
Right. Because I didn't even know me, and God forbid I show you me, you might not like me. And, so I got to be who I think you want me to be and who you like.
And I think there's also another layer to that, because then if they reject you, they reject that persona instead of the real you. So there's some kind of protection mechanism even within that you might be creating.
Right.
Even though the persona that you assumably have created should be rejected less, because it's kind of based on what... Interesting question here. How did you decide who to be for each person?
Well, those of us who have been abused, especially mine started very young, you become very hyper vigilant, right? That's the right word, right? Am I saying that word right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. Well, very sensitive and paying attention to everybody and everything. Because I would literally walk in my front door, and before I would put a foot in, I would look around and assess the situation. So that's kind of how you kind of go into everything. And so I lost the question.
How did you know, like, who the chameleon effect?
Oh, yeah. So I would watch and I would listen and I would pay attention. And a lot of it was trial and error. What I would think, of course, I was probably wrong most of the time, because I mean, seriously, how can I figure out who I think you want me to be? I have to get inside of your head.
Yeah.
There's just so I'm sure I failed a lot. I think when I was successful is, I was able to, I guess, fool someone that I was that person. But I think that, it's not authentic. It's not authentic.
And when did that inauthenticity start?
Oh, I'm sure I learned that in my younger years.
Okay, so
yeah, I mean,
here maybe we can dissect a bit.
Okay.
So do you remember when you were authentic before you became inauthentic?
I do, as a kid. Yeah, I do. I do remember being, yeah, I do. And I was young. I was very young. And then I can remember being teased and ridiculed for being authentic.
Oh.
Yeah. By my brother. It started with my brother. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what are some of the things that you were teased about?
Oh, everything. I mean, I couldn't even go to the bathroom. Everything. I was teased about my ears. I was teased about the way I looked. He picked on my looks a lot. And, I struggled with math in school, so I got teased about that. And my mom thought it was a good idea to try to have my brother tutor me, which was not good. So he, teased me about, picked on me about everything. I told my husband this. I said, I'm weird about the bathroom because he used to scare me all the time. He used to do stuff to scare me. And we shared a bathroom, and I had to lock the bathroom door because I couldn't even take a bath without him doing something to scare the hell out of me all the time. And he'd always find ways. And so, even just that, I still have a weird thing about bathrooms. When I go in, I lock the door. It's just, it was always, I can honestly probably count on one hand the number of times he and I had a decent conversation where there wasn't any kind of stuff going on.
And at what age was it that he started teasing you?
As far back as I can remember. So I'm sure 4 or 5 years old, because he was 7 years older than me. And it's interesting because I remember when I was little, my parents showed me some 8mm film that they had taken of us when we were really little. And I'm probably 2 or 3 years old, running around in the backyard in my little bikini, and my brother's chasing me with a hose. And I remember looking at it the first time I saw it thinking, wow, we're playing together. Wow, interesting. My brother's playing with me. So as far back as I can remember, he had a problem with me.
And then with that comes the inauthenticity.
Right. Yep.
So that was the main thing that started it?
I think so, because I just couldn't be me, no matter what I said, And so when you get picked on enough, then you're like, okay, I got to figure this out, because I want to say something, and I don't want to get picked on. So how can I do this so that I can not get picked on? That's literally what I started thinking, I'm sure.
And I'm now trying to put together a timeline of how did that inauthenticity look like, or what are some of the things that triggered it, and how did it affected your life? Because authenticity is really a powerful thing, also in your self-image and the way you look at yourself and relationship with yourself, especially when you learn that, oh, you can't be yourself.
Honestly, I don't remember ever, I feel like I really lost myself. And I've told this story, I think, before on the podcast. Like in 2016 is when I realized I didn't know who I was. I didn't know my identity. I didn't know who I was. And it's frightening. It was really frightening. And it hit me like I felt like I walked into a wall. It was the most bizarre thing. I didn't see it coming. And I had to go figure out who I am, which is my values, my standards, what I like, what I don't like, what's okay, And so I'm thinking back to when I was little, and I just remember always feeling like I had to make sure I was pleasing this person. I was, making them happy, that I wasn't offending them, that they weren't going to abandon me. They weren't going to hate me.
Okay, so here's a question, again, something that you would say to the audience in case if there's somebody who's going through where they might be in a situation where they put everybody above themselves.
Yeah.
Including their authentic self and their wants, their needs, and all that kind of stuff. And naturally it is affecting them. They might not know how, but I know that for me that place was when you don't feel good. You don't feel good about yourself, or in general. What did you say to them?
Oh, because I'm trying to think of what did I do to begin to get out of that, right? I really honestly started to begin to have a relationship with myself, which meant sitting down and really trying to figure out, it's not just the things that I like and I don't like, but what my values are, what's important to me. And I still and as I'm doing this, you're still going to have the voices in your head telling you, no, 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 no. Because the thing that I would get told is, oh, no, you can't do that. Oh, no, you can't do that. And I would say, why? And I wouldn't get an answer. And so part of it is I had to remove some people in my life that were holding me down. And that's hard because I loved these people very much, but they were holding me back. So that was one of the things that I had to do, which then gave me room to really focus on me. And I quit listening to what other people were telling me they thought I needed to do.
How do you do that? Because there a lot of times comes a lot of pressure. I think with that.
And there's a transition period where you make that decision, and then where it comes to the point where you can stand firm in it, and you have to stand your ground. And it's not that you have to push hard back on someone, but you do need to first you need to figure out what it is that's important to you, and then you have to set the boundaries around it. And some of the things that I started saying to people when the people that like to come over and tell you how to live your life and yet they aren't living their life accordingly is, I appreciate that. I got this. I got it. I appreciate that. No, I appreciate that you're telling me that and that you care. But I got this. And I don't hesitate now. And I don't have people in my life that just come up and tell me that anymore. They don't come up and tell me how they think I should live my life.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I had that all, and I did that. So I was guilty of that as well. In my unhealthy days, I was absolutely guilty of telling people how they should live their life, and my life was not an alignment.